Order. I would like to begin by thanking our distinguished panel of witnesses for testifying today. We look forward to hearing from each of you. First, Ms. Melissa Dalton, the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities. Dr. Charlie Verdon, the Acting NNSA Administrator. Vice Admiral Johnny Wolf, Director of U.S. Navy Strategic Systems Programs. And Lieutenant General James Dawkins, U.S. Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration. In reading through your testimonies, we're reminded that the work of the subcommittee is probably the most important, technical, and consequential of any committee in the House. I'd also like to point out the astonishing continuity over recent years in funding and support for the Triad and nuclear programs. Seldom do you see this level of bipartisanship in modern day Washington, but I'm glad that it's occurring in our #1 defense priority. I ask unanimous consent that the remainder of my opening statement be inserted in the record, and I turn over the opening statement to my colleague, Ranking Member Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing, and I appreciate your bipartisan commitment to these topics. I too will ask that my statement be entered into the record, and I'm going to summarize a few of the points. One, obviously we're under a great deal of pressure having gotten the budget so late, so I'm very concerned about the effects of a CR, and I'm looking for the witnesses to discuss what that might be. Certainly in the nuclear enterprise and the nuclear modernization, the effects of a CR are felt much more strongly. I also want to point out that Congress has the ability to change this, not just by getting our work done, but because the fiscal year is statutory, not constitutional, and we should probably change this. That could pick up at least 3 months a year for the Department of Defense if we made the fiscal year the calendar year. I'm disappointed in the top line in the president's budget. It does not keep up with inflation as we look to those of our adversaries, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, that are modernizing. I think there's a lot that we need to be focusing on, and we're going to certainly be in a resources crunch. There has been a lot of bipartisan work, as you have said, Mr. Chairman, on all the issues that fall under our committee. I'm very concerned, and I think we're all shocked to have heard the news of the Acting Secretary of the Navy appearing to take action to zero out the sea-launched cruise missile. This is something that is incredibly important. We just saw in the news also that the Secretary of Defense and the Chief of Staff apparently were not informed. We know that the nuclear posture review isn't underway, and yet we have the first steps towards actions that would be unilateral disarmament. And of course, even for those who wish to reduce nuclear forces, the best way to accomplish that is through arms control, and you can't achieve arms control if you unilaterally give away assets that could be both beneficial to deterrence and or beneficial to negotiations. I'm looking forward to our witnesses today to discuss their thoughts on that breaking news. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back, and the rest of my statement will be entered in the record.
I thank the gentleman. The first witness, Ms. Dalton.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. May I request permission to submit my written statement for the record and provide brief opening remarks?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. As I described to the subcommittee in April, the United States today faces a complex global threat environment characterized by increasingly sophisticated and militarily capable strategic competitors, destabilizing regional dynamics, and accelerating technological changes that pose significant dangers. China is rapidly becoming more capable and assertive, and concerns regarding its nuclear modernization and expansion are increasing. Russia's comprehensive modernization of its nuclear capabilities, over 80% complete, includes the addition of new dual-capable systems that threaten the United States and its allies and partners. We are confronted with multifaceted deterrence challenges across domains from both competitors, which add increased escalation risks, all making deterrence more challenging. And strategic risks emanating from both North Korea and Iran add significant complication to the strategic threat picture. For these reasons, nuclear deterrence remains the department's highest priority mission, but more is needed to confront these growing, multifaceted threats. That is why Secretary Austin has directed a national defense strategy focusing on integrated deterrence, an effort to address threats and opportunities across conventional, cyber, space, hybrid, information, and nuclear domains. With regard to nuclear deterrence, our nuclear forces remain essential to ensure no adversary believes it can ever employ nuclear weapons for any reason, under any circumstances, against the United States or our allies and partners without risking devastating consequences. That is why the nuclear triad remains the bedrock of our strategic deterrence. But we must modernize our aging capabilities to ensure a credible deterrent for the future. The President's FY22 budget submission supports our efforts to modernize the nuclear triad. It funds all critical DoD nuclear modernization requirements, helping to ensure that modern replacements will be available before aging systems reach the end of their extended service lives. The FY22 budget request for nuclear forces is $27.7 billion. This includes $15.6 billion to sustain and operate our current nuclear forces and $12.1 billion for recapitalization programs. This modernization effort is at a critical juncture, given our aging platforms. As Secretary Austin has stated, U.S. nuclear weapons have been extended far beyond their original service lives, and the tipping point where we must simultaneously overhaul these forces is now here. Updating and overhauling our nation's nuclear forces is a critical national security priority. Even as we continue with nuclear modernization, we will continually review ongoing programs to assess their performance, schedule, risks, and projected costs. The department will always seek to balance the best capability with the most cost-effective solution. Our pending review of nuclear policy and posture, which will be nested under the National Defense Strategy, will ensure that we have the right capabilities to meet our priorities now and in the future. The review will allow us to examine our nuclear posture and policy with an eye towards acting on direction in the administration's interim national security strategic guidance that the United States take steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy while ensuring our strategic deterrent remains safe, secure, and effective, and that our extended deterrence commitments to our allies remain strong and credible. In so doing, our review will focus on the vital interests of the United States and our allies and partners. It will be informed by current and projected global security environment, trends, threats posed by potential adversaries, and the capabilities of the United States and our allies and partners to address those threats, the roles of nuclear weapons, a strategy to reduce those roles, and the impacts of policy, posture, and capabilities on strategic stability and the risks of miscalculation. Consultation with allies will be a core component of this review, and we have begun engaging with allies to ensure that their views are heard and understood before reaching any conclusions. Unique to this review and consistent with the interim guidance, preserving strategic stability will be a significant area of analysis in the review. Steps in this respect have already started with the extension of the New START Treaty, and further analysis based on the President's priorities will occur as our strategic reviews proceed. We look forward to keeping Congress informed as we conduct these reviews. Mr. Chairman, let me conclude by thanking this subcommittee for its previous support for nuclear deterrence and the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dalton. Every witness statement will be inserted for the record by unanimous consent. So I would ask you gentlemen to limit your remarks, as Ms. Dalton did excellently, to about 5 minutes. The next witness will be Dr. Verdin.
Thank you. Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. On behalf of our entire national security enterprise workforce, I express our appreciation for this subcommittee's strong bipartisan support for NNSA's nuclear security missions, as demonstrated most recently in fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act and fiscal year 2021 budget for the Department of Energy. We meet today against the backdrop of a world marked by growing security challenges. China and Russia are modernizing their nuclear arsenal, investing significant resources in delivery platforms, and have made clear that nuclear weapons will be a vital element of their statecraft. At the same time, the risk for proliferation of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction pose profound and existential dangers. Recognizing these global security challenges, the President's FY22 budget request for $19.7 billion for NNSA reflects support for the 3 enduring missions for which Congress charged the NNSA in 2000. Ensuring the safety, security, and effectiveness of the U.S. nuclear stockpile, reducing the threat of nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism around the world, and providing nuclear propulsion for the U.S. Navy's fleet of aircraft carriers and submarines that is critical to the U.S. national security and our allies. Nuclear stockpile. Our alignment and synchronization to improve. The FY22 budget request enables NNSA to execute its nuclear warhead and infrastructure modernization efforts begun under the Obama-Biden administration. The administration is beginning to undertake a formal review of efforts to modernize our nuclear deterrent to include DoD delivery platforms, the nuclear weapons required on those platforms, and the NNSA infrastructure needed to produce and maintain those weapons. Regardless of the review's specific findings, so long as we retain a nuclear arsenal, we must have the infrastructure, science, technology, and engineering to produce and maintain the nuclear weapons stockpile. Unfortunately, the NNSA's production infrastructure has atrophied considerably, both in terms of the physical infrastructure and the capabilities needed within those facilities. Continued recapitalization is imperative. The potential impacts to the U.S. deterrent, if not addressed, are no longer over the horizon. Of particular importance is reestablishing the capability to manufacture plutonium pits. This capability is needed to address risks due to plutonium aging, degrading warhead performance, improve warhead safety and security, and provide the ability to respond to evolving threats to the U.S. nuclear deterrent. We fully recognize that the potential impacts of plutonium aging on warhead performance are uncertain at this time. Plutonium didn't exist, at least we didn't know about it until before 1940, and simply has not been in existence on the planet long enough to have concrete data on how our pits will behave when they are approaching a century old. Given this, it is an assessment of our best technical experts in the weapons program, the 3 NNSA laboratory directors, and independent experts like the Jasons, that the risk is just too high not to have the capability to manufacture plutonium pits at a rate sufficient to refresh the stockpiles pits before they exceed 80 to 100 years in age. In addition to our mission to ensure the continued effectiveness of the nuclear stockpile, nonproliferation also remains an important and growing priority. The NNSA's Office of Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation is critical to implementing the President's call to lock down fissile material and radiological materials around the world. The FY22 budget request enables NNSA's Office of Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation to continue to work worldwide with our partners to prevent state and non-state actors from developing nuclear weapons or acquiring materials usable in nuclear weapons. With regards to our 3rd mission of providing nuclear propulsion for the U.S. Navy, the Office of Naval Reactors remains at the forefront of technological developments in naval propulsion by advancing new technologies and improvements in naval reactor performance. This preeminence provides the U.S. Navy with a commanding edge in naval warfighting capabilities, and the FY22 budget request enables NNSA's Office of Naval Reactors to continue their programs, which are so vital to the security of our nation and the allies. In closing, despite the challenges posed by COVID pandemic, I'm pleased to report that the NNSA did not miss a single major milestone or DoD requirement. This achievement is a testament to the professionalism of NNSA's world-class workforce, the leadership of our sites, and their commitment to national security. In fact, I'm happy to report that as we speak today, the system first production unit for the W-88 AL-370 is being assembled at Pantex. So I thank you again for the strong support of this committee and the opportunity to testify before you today, and I stand ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Verdon. Now we'll hear from Vice Admiral Johnny Wolf.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd like to thank this subcommittee for its continued support of the Navy's nuclear deterrent mission. As you heard from Admiral Richard, Commander, U.S. Strategic Command, nuclear deterrence underwrites every U.S. military operation and capability on the globe and serves as the backstop for both our national defense and the defense of our allies. The nation's nuclear triad of intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic bombers, and ballistic missile submarines serves as the bedrock of our ability to deter major power conflict, assure our allies and partners, achieve U.S. objectives should deterrence fail, and hedge against an uncertain future. The Navy has provided unwavering and singular mission-focused support to the sea-based leg of the triad for over 6 decades. We must sustain today's deterrent while modernizing for the future. This falls into 4 concurrent lines of effort. First, we must maintain the current D5LE missile inventory and provide the necessary operational support to sustain Ohio-class submarines through their service lives. This is being accomplished through an update to all of our subsystems. All of our life extension efforts remain on track, and our current program will support the deployment of all existing warheads. We must also recapitalize our strategic weapons facilities to continue to support and sustain SSBN operations that enable our continuous at-sea presence. Second, we must continue the work with our partners at PEO Columbia to ensure that the transition between Ohio-class and Columbia-class submarines stays on schedule. For SSP, this requires a seamless transition of the current D5LE weapon system and missile inventory onto the new Columbia-class. During this time of transition, we will ensure that the Navy's portion of the nuclear triad remains credible by introducing the W93 Mark VII to rebalance the stockpile of W76 and W88s and meet STRATCOM requirements. Third, it is imperative that we start the work on a future missile and corresponding weapon systems now. This next generation of the current D5LE missile, a missile in service since 1989 and boasting a remarkable history of 182 successful flight tests, is called D5LE-2. D5LE-2 will yield multiple benefits in missile performance to include extending its service life. D5LE-2 is required to completely outload our Columbia-class SSBNs and ensure that Trident remains credible in the face of a dynamic threat environment. A D5LE-2 missile must be developed, tested, and produced with the lead time sufficient to deploy on Columbia-class Hull 9 in FY39. It will then be backfitted for the first 8 hulls of the class. Lastly, one of the greatest advantages the United States has is its alliances and partnerships. As the U.S. project officer for the Polaris Sales Agreement, I will continue to support the UK's sovereign deterrent for today's Vanguard-class submarines and their successor, the Dreadnought class. For decades, U.S. policy has recognized that the independent British nuclear deterrent adds to global stability. Under the 1958 Mutual Defense Agreement and the 1962 Polaris Sales Agreement, the United States has provided assistance and material consistent with international law to the UK deterrent program. Without this assistance, the cost and schedule risk to maintain the UK's independent deterrent would rise significantly, thus creating additional challenges for the UK in sustaining its nuclear contribution to NATO alongside the US. None of these 4 lines of effort are possible without investment in our people, our infrastructure, and our industrial base. Military, civilian, government, and contractor. The men and women of SSP are working hard to deliver a safe, secure, and effective strategic weapon system today that will serve us well into the latter half of the century. They remain my #1 priority in order to ensure continued program success. Nuclear modernization will take time to complete, so work towards these ends must start now and cannot be delayed. It is only through your continued support that the department's top modernization priorities can be achieved. As the 14th director, it is my highest honor to represent the men and women of SSP, comprising approximately 1,700 sailors, 1,000 Marines, 300 Coast Guardmen, and over 1,300 civilians, and over 2,000 contractor personnel. It is my most critical goal to ensure they are poised to execute the mission with the same level of success, passion, and rigor, both today and tomorrow, as they have since our program inception in 1955. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the men and women who make deterrence of major power conflict their life's work. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral Wolf. And now we'll hear from Lieutenant General James Dawkins.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to appear before you today to represent the dedicated men and women of the Air Force's nuclear enterprise. Along with my teammates here at the table, the airmen of the United States Air Force remain committed and work tirelessly to continuously provide the nation a safe, secure, effective, and credible nuclear deterrent. This commitment has become even more significant given the age of our systems and the nature of the current security environment. For the first time in our nation's history, we are on a trajectory to face two nuclear-capable strategic peer adversaries. Russia has multiple types of non-strategic nuclear weapons deployed or in research and development, including short and close-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and anti-ship missiles. Three of Russia's novel strategic systems and its non-strategic nuclear weapons are not subject to the New START Treaty's limits and verification regime. The People's Republic of China, as our principal pacing threat, is nearing completion of its own nuclear triad and will likely at least double their nuclear stockpile this decade. The pace of the PRC's weapons development is very concerning. The U.S. nuclear triad remains the primary military means by which the Department of Defense provides deterrence against existential threats to our homeland and allies. The triad has remained the force posture of choice for each president and Congress since the 1960s. The flexible options it provides the president complicates an adversary's decision calculus should they wish to pursue aggression against the United States or our allies. However, the triad is showing its age, as many of its weapon systems and infrastructure date back to the early 1960s. The President's FY22 budget fully funds our modernization efforts to provide the necessary improvements to counter our potential adversaries' increasing capabilities. The Air Force continues to achieve significant progress in our modernization programs to include the ground-based strategic deterrent, long-range standoff weapon, and B-21 Raider. The GBSD is leveraging cutting-edge digital engineering and has met every major milestone for the past 5 years. The long-range standoff cruise missile and the B-21 are also on schedule. The B-52 modernization efforts are on track, ensuring the aircraft remains relevant through the 2050s. In partnership with the United States Space Force, our nuclear command, control, and communication system remains secure and effective as we modernize capabilities, ensuring future connectivity for leadership and strategic forces in an increasingly challenging cyber environment. The Air Force is committed to providing stable requirements and delivering these modernized weapons system programs on time and on budget. However, we can't do this alone, and we ask for the continued support of the Congress via stable authorization and appropriation, both across both the Department of Defense and the National Nuclear Security Administration enterprise. We owe this not only to our nation, but also to our airmen, who are in some cases manning the same missile sites and flying the same aircraft as their grandparents did. Yet we demand and in fact depend on their success against threats that are far more lethal and sophisticated than their grandparents could have imagined to accomplish a mission that is vital to our nation's security and survival. I thank the committee for your advocacy, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Dawkins. Appreciate the testimony of all the witnesses. I'm grateful for your expertise and your patriotism. All members will be limited to 5 minutes in questioning to more evenly distribute the questioning. And if there's time, perhaps we can do a second round. I'll start off and I have a question or two for Ms. Dalton. You characterize in your testimony that Russia has already 80% recapitalized their nuclear forces. What percentage of completion of recapitalization would you put on our America?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, again for the opportunity to testify. On balance, I will have to get back to you in terms of relative percentage of the U.S. program, but I can tell you that as the Secretary has stated, we are at a critical point of being relatively behind in the need to modernize and recapitalize across all three legs of the triad. So the investments that are made in the FY22 budget submission do seek to modernize for the GBSD, for the Columbia class, and for LRSO. And these are critical capabilities to ensure that we can keep pace with the challenges before us, principally China. And your question pivoted directly off of Russia, but I think the intelligence record suggests that China's nuclear modernization is accelerating at a very concerning rate. So as we proceed with our nuclear posture review, we are going to be closely looking at both of those threat vectors to help inform upcoming programmatic decisions.
Thank you. I was about to turn to China, which seems to be doubling or more their nuclear capabilities. Plus, they have road mobile or underground or other advantages that we lack. And I believe they're not constrained by any treaty, right? We at least have the New START extension with Russia, but that does not apply to China. General Dawkins, you mentioned that there are 3 novel Russian nuclear systems that are not covered by New START. Could you remind us what those are?
Yes, sir. There is the underwater, the submarine with a nuclear armed torpedo, a very large system there, meant as I guess a weapon of vengeance to come up on our coast and detonate. Very hard to defend against, of course. There is a nuclear powered, nuclear armed cruise missile that they have again, not they have, they're under development on these systems, I'm sorry. Under development on these systems that they will be able to use, and of course it could certainly loiter, and then and they're very difficult to defend against those cruise missiles. And the third one is I'm failing to remember. I can take that for the record, but I know they've got a host of other systems that are using the small nuclear weapons that they have put on some of the air defenses and other things, sir.
Thank you. Those are my questions. I'll turn it over now to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my opening statement, I referenced the newsmaking of the acting Secretary of the Navy with respect to taking a step for the cancellation of the sea-launched cruise missile, a missile that both General Hyten and Admiral Richard have openly spoken as fans of. We know that Secretary of Defense and the Chief of Staff have both reported in the news that they were unaware of this action and were not consulted. Admiral Richard said that he heard about it on the news. Admiral Wolf, can you tell me what you know of this action? And if you could also then, in your answer, in addition to what's happening over at the Pentagon with the sea-launched cruise missile that has had this subcommittee and committee support, could you tell us about what Russia's programs are and what their sea-launched cruise missiles are capable of? Because certainly we needed to take into consideration what our adversaries are doing whenever we take a step to review our own commitment to our own systems. Admiral?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question, sir. So I had read the SecNav memo. I was not privy to it before it was actually signed, but my understanding is for the SecNav, it was part of a deliberate process to start the dialogue for building the next PALM. I would point out, however, sir, nuclear modernization for the program of record for D5LE2 for Columbia, for TACAMO for our portion of the air is solid, and it will continue and should continue to be fully funded to all of the estimates. I would also point out that in starting that dialogue, he does point out that it is not a decision. It is meant to get the dialogue started. And of course,
I got to tell you, just to insert it, it's a hell of a way to start a dialogue, is to call for the canceling. But go ahead. You were going to talk about our adversaries, because I do have limited time.
Yes, sir. Understand. Yeah, and from an adversary perspective, I think what General Dawkins talked about and what we all know is, as Russia continues to look at how they can build some of these what they call tactical nuclear capabilities, certainly cruise missiles are a big part of that, because I believe that they look at that as an advantage that they can, even in some of their dialogue on escalating to de-escalating, that provides a significant advantage to them.
Thank you. Ms. Dalton, this announcement in the news comes just on the precursor of the president sitting down with Putin. I believe that unilateral disarmament is certainly, as a policy, idiotic, because we don't have a support for our deterrence, and certainly we have no bargaining chips when we meet with our adversaries. Doesn't this weaken President Biden as he goes to sit down with Putin and say, hey, we should start more arms control negotiations, where his own staff are talking about unilaterally stopping programs that are both important to our deterrence and may be the subject of arms control negotiations? Ms. Dalton?
Representative Turner, in the president's budget request for FY22, from a policy perspective, the department had intended to provide a modest amount of funding for SLCM-N and plans to revalidate that requirement in the course of the nuclear posture review. That is still our intent, to look closely at this program in the NPR. I would say, in terms of the administration's approach to arms control negotiations, we do not support unilateral disarmament. But
Well, it's a point that you made here. So the nuclear posture review, has it commenced?
It is on the cusp of commencing, sir. So it is.
It hasn't even commenced, but yet you have people in the chain of the administration already targeting systems for canceling. Isn't that? I mean, doesn't the nuclear posture review supposed to be like adversary, risks-driven, capabilities-driven? How is it that one system could be singled out when you haven't even begun the nuclear posture review?
Sir, it is our intent to look closely at the SLCM program within the context of the nuclear posture review and make programmatic decisions for FY23 based upon that objective analysis.
Ms. Dalton, when you were before last time we were talking about, there were some proposals that people had tried to latch onto for Minutemen life extension programs that was known as like the best 200. You said that you don't have an ongoing study, you're just updating previous studies. We don't have a copy of the previous best 200 study that was completed at the end of the Obama administration. Would you commit to providing that to the committee?
Happy to follow up with that, sir.
If you could get that to us this week, we'd appreciate it. We're coming back next week, as you know, and it'd be very timely for us to be able to look at it. General Dawkins, sorry. You have indicated that the ground-based strategic deterrence is $38 billion less than a Minutemen III life extension program. Could you elaborate on that? It keeps coming up as a discussion item. Not only are we gaining with the ground-based strategic deterrent additional capabilities, but it is clear from your understanding that it is both the most cost-effective path, correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, and that is true, sir. The GBSD, from the time we did the analysis of alternatives back in 2014, it was shown to be more cost-effective than life extending the Minuteman III over the course of the entire weapon system out to 2075. That $5 billion difference back then in 2014 has since grown to $38 billion now. So again, it is $38 billion more expensive to life extend the Minuteman III. This is primarily, yes, sir.
No, I was gonna jump to my last question to go, Dr. Verdin. Real quickly, you have given us in classified session the justification for ensuring that we needed both Los Alamos and Savannah River in order to be able to hit our 80 plutonium pits. What can you tell us in open session of the need for the Savannah River plutonium processing facility?
So again, we would say all of our analysis still indicates that the two-site solution that we identified is the most effective in terms of both capacity, schedule, and cost way for us to implement and meet the 80 pit per year. When we look at the schedule, when we look at the cost, it still comes out to be the most effective way for us to implementing to achieve that requirement is to take advantage of both the existing facilities at Los Alamos and at Savannah River to implement pit production.
And you're not able to just do it all at Los Alamos, correct?
Doing it, no, it would require building a whole new facility at Los Alamos to be able to do it. PF4 is not large enough.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The next questioner will be Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Let me begin with this. The president's budget request included an additional $700 million for the Columbia above the expected FY21 estimates due to an updated cost estimate assessment and program evaluation review. Vice Admiral Wolf, do you believe this assessment is accurate and the funding in the budget is adequate?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. So I did talk to Admiral Papano from PO Columbia, and yes, sir, based on the CAPE estimate that was completed in August of 2020, which is what the new estimate and the reason for the increase in requests for this fiscal year, it is consistent with everything that the Navy has seen, that what the CAPE has done, and we have funded to that CAPE estimate. So yes, sir, we believe it is accurate.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Verdon, so I've been interested for some time now in developing low enriched uranium fuel for submarine propulsion. In doing so, it would prevent us from having to restart production of weapons grade uranium. Also can't be stolen for that purpose. I wanted to ask for the record, will NNSA continue to support effort to study the viability of this critical non-proliferation effort should additional funding be made available?
We are committed to continue to look at that. We are still working with the administration to balance the requirements, both the non-proliferation requirements and also the Navy's operational requirements. So that still continues to be a study, but we are continuing to look at what are the technical feasibilities of doing it. But the broader administration is taking a hard look also at the balance of the non-proliferation goals against the Navy's operational requirements as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Vice Admiral Wolf, in your testimony, you mentioned that we can no longer wait to invest in critical workforce skills and complex technologies. What types of programs should Congress be encouraging?
Yes, sir. I think with what we do with our workforce, looking at the critical technologies, things like Red Hard and those that are very unique to what General Dawkins' organization and what we do. I think we very much put a premium on education and programs that encourage our folks to continue their education as well as to hone their skills for these critical programs.
Thank you. I can't agree more that we need to focus heavily on our workforce development, especially where we have significant gaps. It's in our national interest to address those gaps sooner rather than later. Final question I have for General Dawkins: are your NC3 modernization efforts meeting their schedule, performance, and budget metrics?
Yes, sir. For the most part, they are. We've got. I could go into an acronym soup here, but some of the new systems to replace our current systems that provide advanced high frequency capability to our missile sites and several other upgrades are again on time and tracking well. There have been some systems that do some alerting of the crew force, if you will, that we are getting our requirements correct and ensuring that those are going to be on track for the future. But for the most part, sir, we feel that we are in a good place, but this will take renewed focus or a constant focus to ensure that we don't get behind.
Good. Well, this is something we're going to continue to track. We look forward to staying in touch with you on that topic. Those are the questions I had for at this point. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lanchman. Now, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Jim Cooper and Ranking Member Mike Turner for the bipartisan cooperation on putting together this very important hearing. And we appreciate each one of the witnesses. And Administrator Verdon, according to the President's budget, the critical decision 1 for the Savannah River Plutonium Processing Facility is expected to be released sometime this month of June. And is that timeline still accurate? And if so, will that create the first credible cost and schedule baseline? And does the President's budget match what was revealed through the NNSA's initial review of the paperwork?
So yes, sir, we are still on track to accomplish the CD1 approval requests before the Deputy Secretary by the middle of this month. And indeed, the 22 budget request has the funding in there necessary that if we get the approval to do the work to progress towards critical decision 2, to continue to mature the design.
Well, thank you very much. And as you well know, NNSA is so well thought of at Savannah River site. We wish you the best of success. Additionally, Administrator, I appreciate your opening comments. I appreciate the very pithy and positive statements by Congressman Mike Turner, all the way from Dayton, Ohio, and questioning and restating that the Department of Energy, Secretary Jennifer Granholm, the NNSA nominee Jill Ruby, U.S. Strategic Command Commander Admiral Charles Richard, all are on record supporting the two-site solution. This shows clear bipartisan support from among administrations. Moving forward, what do you see as the biggest risk to delay in achieving 80 pits per year by 2030? Is it the funding? Should this be addressed in future budget requests?
It will be, yes, it will be, the funding that will be required will be, one of the key factors. And then it's also how we manage the supply chain, getting the critical equipment in a timely fashion. And we're beginning to work that issue as we speak, to work with vendors to try to make sure we can optimize that between both the Savannah River requirements and the Los Alamos requirements. But certainly identifying the right funding profile that can be, afforded by the nation will be one of the key factors.
Thank you very much. And General Dawkins, numerous studies have shown a one-site pit production solution is cost prohibitive and does not provide the basic resiliency necessary for our nuclear infrastructure, which is so crucial, as we've discussed, to have the deterrence to maintain peace through strength. From a defense perspective, what are the consequences to the credibility of our nuclear deterrence by limiting pit production to one-site production?
Sir, thank you for the question. And having served at NNSA several years ago, I know they are challenged with the infrastructure that they have. We work very closely, working also with the Nuclear Weapons Council, with NNSA to ensure that the plans that we have are executable. I think we would, as across the department, speaking for the department, would be challenged to continue with all of our modernization programs out into the future. It would be difficult with a single site. Again, I'm not the expert on that. Dr. Burden, I will defer to him, but I know that our nation needs to be able to produce pits, and having everything in one location might be, it might be more strategically valuable to have a couple.
Well, we actually, Savannah River Site looks forward to working collaboratively with Los Alamos and to achieve pit production, which is so critical since many of the pits are 60 years or older. And so we've got to modernize, and I want to back you up and work with Chairman Cooper and Ranking Member Turner. And finally, a question for Ms. Secretary Dalton, and that is the Biden administration has expressed its intent to develop its own nuclear posture review, indicating a change in U.S. nuclear policy. What parts of the 2018 nuclear posture review does the administration plan to change, and what is the timeline for delivery?
Thank you for the question. So we are just beginning the nuclear posture review, and we will be conducting that, as I noted, nested within the National Defense Strategy. Statutorily, we are required to deliver to Congress the NDS in January of 2022. So we are aiming for a similar timeline for the completion of the NPR. But as noted in my last honor to testify before you all, I'm happy to come up and brief you on some of our emergent findings of the NPR as we proceed this summer. In terms of the review of declaratory policy, that is obviously a presidential level decision. And so even as the department progresses in its work on specific DoD aspects of nuclear posture, we will also be engaged in an interagency process to review the nuclear policy implications. But our North Star, to begin with, is the interim national security strategic guidance, which indicates that this administration will take steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy while upholding our extended deterrence commitments to allies and partners and ensuring a safe, effective, and secure nuclear deterrent.
We look forward to working with you. I'm confident in a bipartisan manner. I now yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now, Mr. Moulton is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everybody for coming here today and participating in this discussion, and my colleagues on the committee, because this couldn't be a more important topic. Secretary Dalton, I'd like to start with you. Hypersonic weapons, we've talked a lot about them recently, and they have the potential to be highly destabilizing, particularly if we pursue them blindly in a tit for tat with PRC or Russian development without carefully developing the operational concepts for their use. On the other hand, conventional hypersonic missiles could certainly change our adversary's calculus in a way that reduces our reliance on nuclear weapons for strategic stability. So, Ms. Dalton, do you believe we have a clear vision for how we integrate hypersonic capabilities into the U.S. arsenal in a way that deters rather than potentially increases the risk of a nuclear response?
Thank you, Representative Moulton. It's a great question, and I think this is why the Secretary has encouraged us in the course of the NDS to look holistically at integrated deterrence. So we're not looking at any one domain or system in a silo. So, to take the specific mention of hypersonic missiles, this administration is proceeding with investments in that capability because we think it's important to be able to keep pace with key challengers such as China and Russia to be able to respond with speed and at distance. But as we are developing these capabilities, as you mentioned, the importance of concepts of operations, we are doing a lot of legwork behind the scenes in classified channels to ensure that as we are developing out this capability, we're doing so responsibly. And at present, are only making investments in a conventional capability when it comes to hypersonic missiles, but this will be among the capabilities that we're looking at through this frame of integrated deterrence so that we can account for potential escalation risks as we look across different scenarios involving particularly China and Russia.
Madam Secretary, if I may say, integrated deterrence and some other things you've said are music to my ears, and hopefully to the ears of others on the committee, but in a lot of ways you've succeeded in saying a lot of good things without answering the question. It seems pretty clear that we don't have a strategy, and while it must be developed in classified terms, I understand that, it also needs to be clearly communicated to our adversaries, which can't be entirely classified. So I look forward to hearing more about how you develop this. We have to have these operational concepts made clear before we spend billions of dollars on taxpayer money to develop weapons that we may not need or could actually make our strategic situation worse. Let me move, if I may, to General Dawkins and Admiral Wolf. Thank you very much both for your calls. We discussed on the phone in our extensive conversations the importance of not only developing highly technically qualified workforce, but retaining them. And I'm anxious to hear how you measure your progress. What we're doing today is clearly not adequate. We're losing too much talent, and it's going out the door quicker than we can count. How are you actually measuring your progress in better training, attracting and retaining personnel?
Representative, thank you for that question, and that is something that is foremost on our mind, particularly as we are going into the bow wave of modernization, where all of these programs are ramping up. Whether it's finding workforce inside the Air Force itself or out in the industrial complex, that is something that OSD tracks closely, that we track in the Nuclear Weapons Council, and the Air Force is focused on that as well. The ways we track that is we do keep track of where of our ability to hire. That is, at times challenging because of the nature of the work we do and the security clearances. But we do work with local universities. For instance, out with the ground-based strategic deterrence out at Utah, they work with local universities and other places to recruit these folks and bring them in, and then offer the incentives that they can to actually retain them. And the broader Air Force.
I'm afraid I'm just about out of time, and Chairman Cooper is quite strict with us, as he should be. But if you could just take this for the record and share with us some of the statistics, the ways that you actually track this, so we can see measurable progress on these fronts, it would be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Admiral Wolf, I have a question for you, a background question about the sea-launched cruise missile. But first, I just want to make a comment about the acting secretary's unilateral decision. It appears to me that he's gone rogue. And I don't say that lightly. It appears to me that he's gone rogue because the people above him and the people below him are denying any knowledge of this decision and seem to be disavowing the decision. And secondly, it comes at a horrible time. It really does damage to President Biden's position vis-a-vis Mr. Putin in these upcoming discussions. So the timing could not be any worse. But back to you, Admiral Wolf. For background, what kind of capability does it give the United States and our strategic posture to be able to have the capability and flexible that a sea-launched cruise missile provides?
Sir, at a very high level, I can answer that. I really believe that Admiral Richard could really give you in a classified setting what the real capability is. But what I would tell you is it gives it, if you think about deterrence, it gives you another decision tool for the president and for Stratcom. And what it really does is it causes yet another calculus thought that the adversary has to have before they think that we would have to use something bigger than a sea-launched cruise missile. So it does provide many options to continue this deterrent thought process.
Thank you so much. General Dawkins, I have a couple questions for you. I'm going to focus in on the MILCON projects that are intended to be accomplished out at Vandenberg Air Force Base and for software at Hill Air Force Base in support of GBSD. If those MILCON projects were not funded in this year's NDAA and appropriation bills, how much would that set back the GBSD program, and how detrimental would that be?
Sure, thank you for the question. And as you're aware, the Vandenberg Space Force Base is where we do our testing. We typically do 4 what we call Glory Trip ICBM launch testings each year. As we transition to GBSD, our first flight for the GBSD missile will be 1 December of 23. I know that they need to get to start that work out there at Vandenberg in order to facilitate this test. I'd like to take it for the record, though, to get you the exact impacts of if we do not get the full funding in the MILCON or it slips. But I do know that there will be impacts, sir.
And those would be negative impacts?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Changing gears, General Dawkins, I would like to hear you respond to something that Admiral Richard pointed out. He said that if we ever reduce the number of ICBMs, or God forbid, remove the leg of that triad completely, that would, quote, solve a critical problem for China, unquote. So could you elaborate on what he was referring to about China's calculus if we degrade the ability of our land-based leg of the triad?
Yes, sir. So without ICBMs, we quickly will turn China into a peer adversary. And so when we look at how the ICBM force is a ready and responsive force, the most responsive of the legs of the triad, it provides a pretty, it enhances strategic stability by providing a great deterrent against an adversary, because they know that if they were to do us harm as a nation, it would have to be a fairly large attack for them to do that. And in fact, they would be attacking the homeland, and that would, that in and itself enhances deterrence and will make them, or any potential adversary perhaps, take a step back and go, do we really want to commit to a large-scale attack against the United States homeland?
Thank you. And how serious of a problem is it for us to not have any kind of treaty or any kind of verification or knowledge of what China is doing with its tunnel system, with its ability, combined with mobile launchers, to hide the existence of and the number of ICBMs that they might have?
So, sir, I'm a big believer in arms control treaties that are verifiable and executable or enforceable. a lot of our treaties are based on simply numbers, and I think it's important also to look to capabilities as an important part of that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Panetta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your understanding getting me in to ask questions. Just real quick, Ms. Dalton, obviously, thanks to all the witnesses for being here, and thank you for your service. But Ms. Dalton, when does the administration plan to complete its nuclear posture review, and when will it begin, and what exactly will it entail going forward?
Thank you, Representative Panetta, for the question. So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the NPR will be nested within the National Defense Strategy, and we are just commencing the NPR leg, if you will, of those strategic reviews. We plan to structure it in such a way that there will be decision off-ramps as we get into the end of the Palm Belt and into PBR season, such that the objective analysis that we do in the NPR can feed into programmatic decisions that are relevant for the FY23-27 FYDP. In terms of what we plan to cover in the NPR, as noted earlier, there will be a look at declaratory policy, which we will do in concert with the interagency. There will be a thorough assessment of the security environment. Many things have changed since the last time there was a Democratic administration in power that we will need to be cognizant of. And we will look to define, based on the integrated deterrence frame, which I know is still in development, and we will be able to say more on as we move forward, how that relates to thinking about the use of strategic forces like nuclear weapons in that deterrence construct. And then, as I noted, the specific implications then for programs and modernization. So in brief, those are the areas for examination.
Okay, in regards to that, in regards to the nuclear command and control modernization, do you believe that there will be a review in regards to the sole launch authority of the president?
So I know that is a question that has come up with in some of the early consultations that we've had with outside groups, and we are committed to taking input from all stakeholders across the nuclear committee to help inform our review.
And that will include this subcommittee right here?
Yes, absolutely.
Outstanding. Great. Thank you. I appreciate that and look forward to working with you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all of our witnesses. General Dawkins, I think there's kind of a common criticism or belief out there that ICBMs are on a, quote, hair trigger alert. Can you tell us about the redundancies built into the launch system, as well as how they're actually targeted out in the open ocean, and how those are built in to assuage some of those concerns?
Yes, Representative, and thank you for the question. So that is a misnomer. While the ICBMs are ready and responsive, and we do have two crew members down there in the launch control centers awaiting a presidential order, it requires an order from the president to be transmitted through our NC3 systems down to the crew members, and for them to decode any of those orders they get, ensure that they are verifiably from the president and otherwise. As far as the process goes, the president, if necessary, if we are under attack of some sort, the president we have a means to bring the president into a conference. The Department of Defense does, and Joint Staff to ensure, and he can also bring all of his senior advisors across the national security complex and any ones that he wants into this conference to discuss how to respond. It is a very measured process, and then the president can decide whether he wants to respond with nuclear weapons or choose something else. The great thing about the triad is the president does not have to use the ICBMs because we have a survivable leg in the submarine launched ballistic missile capability. So that's an example of the great attributes that the triad brings. So the president does not have to launch on attack or launch on warning. He can wait and gather more information, or he has to make a decision because he has a submarine force.
Great, thank you. And that leads me to my next question. This committee heard testimony from Admiral Richard that if the ICBM leg of the triad was allowed to atrophy further, that he would need to put bombers and refuelers back on alert. Do you have a sense, and this is for any of the witnesses, how much that would cost? And is it safe to assume that this cost was not factored in to the $38 billion in savings by choosing the GBSD over Minuteman III life extension?
Representative, that was not a factor in the cost or any of the studies and analysis. We don't have an analysis right now that says how much extra that cost will be. I call them transfer costs. If you do something with one leg of the triad, you may have transfer costs associated with it if you transfer other missions to the remaining two legs. With the bomber force, because we've not been on alert since the early 1990s when we were pulled off alert and we had hundreds and hundreds of bombers, actually, on and able to be on alert. We would have to do a couple of things. We'd have to buy more bombers, we believe, buy more tankers. We'd have to get more infrastructure and, of course, bring in more people to be able to sustain that capability, the alert capability. Just as concerning is how we would detract. If we didn't have that extra capability, we would detract from our ability to do our conventional missions with these dual role bombers, the B-2, the B-1, or the B-2 and the B-52, and soon to be the B-21 and the B-52. So again, it would be a drain on resources that we would also use, or we also use today, for other combatant commanders.
Yeah, thank you. And I didn't know does anyone else have anything to add on that? If we allow the ICBM to atrophy, the burden that puts on the other two legs, cost and impact on readiness.
Yes, sir. This is Admiral Wolf. So I would tell you from a Navy perspective, as Admiral Richard looks at what he needs to achieve in support of the president, there's a possibility that could call on the Navy to pick up more of that mission. And I would tell you today, with the platforms that we've got and the assets we've got, that would be almost impossible. In the future, that would potentially require you to build more Columbia-class submarines. That would potentially cause us to build more assets and look at how we could work with our partners at NNSA to then provide the adequate number of warheads that would go on there. So I would say it would be a huge downstream impact even to the United States Navy.
So less ICBMs, more bombers, more subs. Is that just not to oversimplify, but that's essentially what we'd be facing to keep the same capability, the same deterrent capability.
I would add the word potentially, sir. Potentially that could be the outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everyone here for your service and testifying. On April 3rd, 2019, Lieutenant General Richard Clark, who I know you know, then the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence, noted that we have one more opportunity to extend Minuteman III. I'd like to understand why that option of extending it one more time is not a good option and why that hasn't been explored.
Thank you, Representative Khanna, and thank you for the question. So I'm familiar with the statement from 2 years ago. I think it's important whenever we discuss life extending the system or GBSD, we understand that we're talking about a total system replacement. General Clark was talking about a subcomponent of just the missile itself. And the missile itself has several key subcomponents. There's 330 plus parts in it, but there are about 4 subcomponents that actually have to be modernized or life extended as well. And we needed to have made those decisions on some of those key ones several years ago, back in 2015. Now, on What he was talking about was just a single stage booster, and it has 3. And he said there would be that we might be able to re-pour the propellant one more time. What we found whenever we've re-poured the propellant, and basically you take the booster and you ream the propellant out, bring it out, you thin the wall of the booster, results in a 50% reject rate. So just doing that, we will not have enough boosters to even contribute to the other stages of the missile that would have to be replaced at great expense. One example is the propulsion system rocket engine. We needed to have started that program back in 2016. That was roughly almost a $7 billion project back then, and I don't know what it's grown to now.
I respect obviously your service and your expertise. I guess my question is, has there been a comprehensive study on how much it would cost and what it would require to extend Minuteman, and a cost benefit analysis between that choice and the GSBD system?
Yes, sir. There have been several studies, and the foundational one is the analysis of alternatives from 2014. It looked at life extending Minuteman III versus GBSD and a few other options as well. And it was determined that at the time in the Obama administration that we would forego life extension because it was more expensive at the time, $5 billion more expensive over the lifetime of the system to do a Minuteman III life extension versus going with a system replacement.
Now, that was premised, I know there was something that you submitted premised on 400 deployed ICBMs by 2075. President Reagan would probably roll over in his grave if he thought we'd have that many ICBMs by then, when his vision was to end the nuclear arms race. How was 400 chosen?
400 was, again, decided under the New START Treaty. When we signed up to the New START Treaty back in 2010, the Obama administration at the time determined the best way to meet the requirements of the treaty was to reduce from 450 to 400 ICBMs. And then,
yeah, I understand that, but how do we know that we're going to need that many? And I guess getting to Representative Waltz's question, isn't it true just strategically that the ICBMs are a much easier target for an adversary to take out than the submarine or the Air Force? And so has there been an analysis whether strategically we may be better off actually having more submarine and Air Force capacity going in the future?
General Dawkins, would you like me to just yes. Representative Khanna, thank you so much for all of these excellent questions. In the course of the NPR, we're going to be taking a hard look at what is required to maintain a safe, effective, and secure nuclear deterrent, while also attempting to be fiscally responsible given the cost of these programs. So based on the analysis that General Dawkins has referenced, we will be interrogating that analysis with the types of questions that you are asking to ensure that we have the right balance across the triad.
You know, I think it just is very important. And also, you know, I know you've talked about the capacity being improved by the GBSD as opposed to Minuteman, but it's not clear. Well, what is the vulnerability of the Minuteman? Are there things that we couldn't do right now? Are we vulnerable in ways that would be improved by the GBSD, or because they say it gives us better targeting? The other question, and frankly, being from Silicon Valley with cyber attacks, is whether we'd be better off being in an analog system than going to a digital system. I mean, could the digital system make us more at risk to an adversary in an age of cyber warfare? I obviously have deep admiration, respect for all of your patriotism. I know you're trying to do what's right for our country. I would just ask that, if we could have more of an analysis on some of these questions as alternatives, it will help better understand and help us make more informed decisions.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about infrastructure just for a minute. Mr. Verdon, Y-12 National Security Complex is one of the most important national security assets, not only in Chairman Cooper and my home state of Tennessee, but in the entire country. However, if you were to look at the state of disrepair at some of the facilities, you wouldn't know it. We cannot modernize our nuclear arsenal without having the necessary infrastructure in place to undertake those programs. In the FY 2018 NDAA, my colleagues and I worked in this committee to help address this issue by creating the Infrastructure Modernization Initiative, as well as broader minor construction authorities to help remedy these problems at NNSA. While both appear to have been successful in making some progress, it is abundantly clear that more work still needs to be done, not only at Y-12, but across the nuclear security enterprise. Is the 20 million, so my question for you, is the 20 million minor construction threshold that you are all operating with adequate to accomplish desired modernization efforts, or does that number deserve a second look in light of the inflation and increased construction costs?
So I would say that based on those last points you brought up, we should take a look at it again, because it certainly, when you did give us an increase, it was beneficial, but because of all the things you just cited, that benefit has been being eroded relatively quickly. So looking at increasing that would certainly be a benefit for us.
Okay. Any idea on what kind of number?
So we were looking at something on the order even going up to 30 or up to 40 for that would be for the types of projects that we'd like to be able to move out and address quickly based on what we're seeing for cost of increased labor and concrete and lumber and steel would be the kind of the range we'd be looking at.
Okay, thank you. For General Dawkins and perhaps Ms. Dalton, if we have time for you both to answer on this next question. Many on this committee, myself included, have concerns about the Biden administration's nuclear posture review and what it may look like, particularly as it pertains to a sole purpose policy. In the past, President Biden has expressed support for a sole purpose doctrine, and I'm concerned that he may turn his personal stance into U.S. policy. Those concerns are also shared by many of our allies like Poland, Japan, the Republic of Korea, who rely heavily on our extended deterrence and assurance. Admiral Richards, commander of our strategic forces, has stated that the sole purpose doctrine would be detrimental to our alliances and our goal of nuclear nonproliferation. So first, will this administration consult with our allies before making such consequential change to U.S. policy? And second, in your discussions with the decision makers on this issue, do you believe that they are fully aware of the consequences the adoption of a sole purpose policy would have on our alliances and our nuclear nonproliferation?
Thank you for the question. We are absolutely committed to robust, early, and often consultations with our allies and partners as we embark on these strategic reviews. In fact, we have already begun those consultations. I will say that with the release of the interim national security strategic guidance, that also prompted a number of questions from allies and partners in terms of the line on reducing the role or taking steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons. But of course, the next part of that is while upholding our extended deterrence commitments to our allies and partners, it is one of the top priorities of this administration to revitalize our alliances and partnerships. So as we move forward, we will be working in lockstep with our allies and partners to understand their threat perceptions, their asymmetry of interests when it comes to China and Russia, what their comparative advantages are when looking more broadly at deterrence, to include where they may also be making nuclear contributions, but also as that relates to conventional means as well in cyber and space. So we're absolutely committed to working this in lockstep, and that will be a key priority in determining the way forward on our declaratory policy.
Okay, General Dawkins, about 40 seconds left.
Sir, I defer to what Ms. Dalton said, but I believe that all of this will be looked at in the NPR, and I know that the allies want to be involved in the process as well, and that what we provide them for extended deterrence is the reason. And so again, I think the review will address all of those things. Thank you.
Okay, well, I thank all of our witnesses today, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Let's see. Now we will hear from who's next? Mr. Morelli, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to all our witnesses. I think it's been good to have conversations both Admiral Wolf and General Dawkins, and I appreciate that. But also hope that Dr. Burton, that you still have many friends in the Rochester area. I want to just talk a little bit about my district, which is home in Rochester, New York, which is home to the Laboratory of Laser Energetics at the University of Rochester. It's a key part of NNSA's inertial confinement fusion program, which is a critical component of the stockpile stewardship program to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. And I'm glad to have the opportunity right now to just discuss the FY22 budget. And Dr. Verdon, maybe I can start with you. For nearly 2 decades, we've not seen major infrastructure investment in any of the 3 complementary ICF facilities. Meanwhile, China and Russia are building modern facilities intended to rival or exceed U.S. capabilities. So can you share, does NNSA have a plan to address research infrastructure needs at the ICF sites?
So we are indeed we've just started to look at that, and part of the reviews we had for 2020 and the Jason's review was to begin to lay the foundation of how we should move forward into the future in the very important area of inertial confinement fusion. And part of that was with the focus on helping us identify what potential future facilities in those areas might look like or what they should be. So that is certainly, it is in our process. We are starting that process now, but the goal will be to identify what are the future capabilities or upgrades that would be needed in those areas.
That's encouraging. Do you have a sense of what the timeline will be for that, Doctor?
So the reports, we're just digesting some of the conclusions of the reports now. So it's probably going to still be a few years before we kind of go through it in quite a bit of detail. But we are beginning to gather information, as I say, about what people are thinking. But we're also trying to push the system to make sure we're not just thinking near term, but as you say, looking for the future. What do we really need for the long term?
Right. Aside from the facilities question, the ICF research is a critical component of the stockpile stewardship program. So both the NNSA's ICF 2020 report and the research reviewed by the Jason Defense Advisory Panel provide specific recommendations to strengthen the capability. Are the current requested funding levels by the administration sufficient to fully implement these recommendations?
We assess that they are, that we are supporting the program that we need to conduct in this area. And so we believe that particularly the 22 budget does support what we need to do in this area.
Well, recent budgets have focused on NNSA production complex, yet I think it's NNSA science, technology, and engineering capabilities, and the associated expert workforce that underpin our confidence in the safety, security, reliability of the nuclear deterrent. So do you agree that NNSA needs to maintain world-leading scientific capabilities and workforce? And again, does the budget request, which contains significant cuts to several FP&E areas from fiscal year 21 levels, sufficiently prioritize those needs?
It's always a risk benefit calculus that we're constantly doing, but we believe that the funding that we put forward for 22 supports the highest priority programs in that area. And we're even upgrading some additional capabilities in the science area to include exascale computing and the enhanced capabilities of subcritical experiments in Nevada. So we are adding new capabilities to address existing gaps. So again, we are trying to make sure we balance, all the requirements across the entire stewardship program, but we certainly support that the science area remains key. It underpins just about every decision we make.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm obviously going to be a fierce advocate for this in our conversations over the next several weeks. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate very much the time and the opportunity to have this conversation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morelli. I appreciate that. Mr. Garamendi? We seem to be having technical difficulties.
To say the least.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. I'm late to the meeting. I'm having trouble with AT&T, with whom I seem to be carrying on a long and duration fight. But thank you very much. I want to follow up on questions that Mr. Khanna had posed to General Dawkins. Specifically, what I want to get into is the Minuteman III, the life extension of it. General Dawkins, under the present plan, it appears as though the Minuteman III will remain as one of the two ICBM systems for the next minimum of 15 years, probably closer to 20 years. Is that true, that there'll be actually two types of missiles being used over the next 20 years?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I'm not tracking two missiles. I'm only tracking the single Minuteman III missile. There are two warheads, though, that go on top of the missile, the W87-0, right now for the Minuteman III, as well as the 78.
Right. That's a good piece of information, but I was actually talking about your present plan is to have the Minuteman III in the silos, operative, as well as the GBSD as the transition takes place. If that is correct, then the Minuteman III is good for at least the next 15, probably closer to 20 years as the GBSD comes online. Therefore, the argument that the Minuteman III cannot be extended seems to be incorrect. Also, with regard to the cost differential that you spoke to a few moments ago is really based on the next 75 years and extending the Minuteman III over and over again during that period of time, while the GBSD would be, the Minuteman III would be in place, as I just suggested, with the GBSD during the transition period, and then the GBSD would go forward, and it too would have to be life extended over that 75-year period of time. Is that correct?
Congressman, we have to keep the Minuteman III going until the last GBSD is put in place. So the plan right now is until 2027 to field the first GBSD. As that first one goes in, a Minuteman III system comes out, and we will harvest the parts from that Minuteman III, as well as all the infrastructure that supports it, to feed back into the supply system to continue the remaining missiles, to keep them online till 2036, when we will have the final GBSD in place. So it is a just-in-time. Go ahead, sir.
Well, so the fact is that the Minuteman III is being life extended. You're using the harvesting technique, which is one way of doing it. The other is to acquire the necessary parts and pieces to keep the Minuteman III in place. My second series of questions go to the cost. The current estimate of the cost of the GBSD system over the next decade, that is the decade of the 20s, is somewhere north of $80 billion. What is the anticipated cost in the next decade? That is the decade of the 30s.
Sir, I don't have that broken down by decade. I do know that over the life of the GBSD program, which right now that is out from 2026, if you will, out to 2075. That was the time frame that we're using, out to 2075. That it is somewhere in the number of $264 billion for the total lifetime cost that's of GBSD.
I think it's a very interesting and questionable of whether you use a 55-year time horizon here to estimate cost in the system. I'll let that go at that point. I want to turn very quickly to, well, we don't have time for that. The issue of command and control and the analog versus digital needs very, very careful attention. I'll be out of time here. I am going to pursue this issue more completely to completely understand this phase in, phase out, just in time, and the fact that the Minuteman III is actually going to be life extended for at least the next, probably the next 15, more likely the next 20 years. So with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I want to thank all the members for participating. These remote hearings are not always easy, but I appreciate your participation. especially when there are technical issues. I'd like to close the hearing with this final question for Dr. Verdon. Dr. Verdon, based on current estimates and planning, will the NNSA be able to meet the 80 pit requirement by 2030 as required by law?
So based on our latest information, we assess that meeting the 2030, particularly at Savannah River, is not going to be achievable. It will be, right now our estimate will be between 32 and 35 based on our current our critical decision 1 information.
So that's even using Los Alamos and Savannah River.
So Los Alamos, we still have high confidence of achieving 30 pits a year by 2026. It's what we learned in putting the 30% design complete on Savannah River and being able to work closely with the vendors and starting to engage them on the details of the design, that we identified that getting Savannah River to produce war reserve pits by 2030 just doesn't look achievable at this time.
Is there any other way to do it faster?
Not that we have identified, because again, a lot of what we're starting to see is the long poles in the tent is just ordering the long lead equipment through the vendors. And then also just the amount of dollars that you can execute in any given year is also limited. That you could postulate you could do it, but the amount of dollars to execute would be a difficult program. So that's why we're trying to work out both technically and just what we can execute at.
Thank you. Does the ranking member have a final question? Thought?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think we've covered it all. I appreciate the information we received today. It certainly is very helpful.
Thank our distinguished witnesses. The hearing is now adjourned.